March 17th, 2019, Calvin Castine at the Clinton County Historical Association Museum upstairs. And this is where a lot of presentations take place. And tonight we're going to have a face that's familiar to a lot of people who've watched Hometown Cable over the years. What's your name, young fella?
Roger Black.
All right, Roger Black. And people may know you from some of the presentations you've done in the Catholic Summer School and other things happening around Cliff Haven. And tonight you're going to be talking about presidents in the North Country, visiting either, I assume, some even before they were president.
It starts with McKinley when he was president. Theodore Roosevelt was picked when McKinley was killed. So both of them were president when they came up here. But we've had other people here, and they ran for president or were presidents.
Okay, so we'll be hearing about every one of those?
We'll be hearing about a lot of them. I never meant for this to be every president who's visited the North Country. I know Gerald Ford was here in '76. I have a postcard of FDR on the base, so he was up here. Those are the only other two. I know, of course, Trump was here during his campaign.
Well, Hillary was here too, but
Yeah.
she didn't quite make it. So, yes, so it's going to be about how long of a presentation?
It'll be, I think, about 45 minutes. It started from, I was just doing an inventory of pictures that we had of presidents. And that was around the time that I saw a documentary on Teddy Roosevelt, and then I later saw one on FDR. And when I was looking at the photos, I realized there is a weird kind of connections between a lot of them. And that's what made me think about putting this together. That and Helen is always bugging me to come up with something new.
Something old.
Yeah, and so I did that, and this grew out of that. It wasn't meant to be all the presidents who have ever been in the North Country, but it winds up covering most of them.
Okay, so people who have seen you on Hometown Cable, but they may have run into you in other times during your career. Tell us a little about what you did over the years.
Few people, not a lot of them, but a few people remember me from radio, and I was on radio WKDR from 1969 to 87.
So wasn't that about when they started in '69 or so?
They started in '68, yeah, and I got there a year later, and I loved radio. That was great. I went from there to television and Channel 5, and then I was in the Press Republican for 21 years. So most of the time I've been in the media.
And at the press, you had an important job there.
I did a lot of their internet stuff,
Right.
and
So you were the grandfather of the internet.
yeah, for this for that paper, yeah. And I saw a lot of changes in publishing. I mean, it's amazing when I think about all the things that have changed since I started in radio. And all the changes that the internet brought, and just the market in general.
As I recall, wasn't KDR just overlooking Bridge Street there, right on Margaret Street when they first started?
Yeah, their first studios were on the second floor, just like what you said, looking down in what is now Pizza Bono, the second floor, but looking down Bridge Street.
So that was an interesting place to work. I hope you didn't work nights, because that would have been an interesting
No.
spot.
It was a daytime radio station, so that wasn't a problem.
Okay. All right. Anything else we should know about you, Roger? Are you retired now? And this is
Oh yeah, I'm very retired.
very retired.
Busy, yeah, busier than ever. No, it's trying to take it easy and just having a good time.
Except when Helen bugs you to
Yeah,
do something.
yeah, yeah, and she's always bugging me.
Well, good. I hope she keeps it up, because you always have something interesting.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Roger Black. Thanks.
Usually I like to start at 6:30, and I'll apologize for anyone who comes in later in advance, but I like us to get going. I'm Helen Nurska. I'm the director of the Clinton County Historical Association. I've been working with Roger since I sort of got here. It started with CCHA, but Roger was here long before I was working here. Roger arrived in Plattsburgh in 1969 after graduating from Syracuse University to begin an 18-year career in radio at the local station WKBR. 1987, Roger moved to television at WPTZ, Channel 5, and eventually to the Press Republican, where he was director of Internet Services. And now he's retired, and like most of us, is busier than ever. Some years ago, he began investigating the CCHA glass plate negative collection and celluloid collection, and found hundreds of one-of-a-kind scenes and thousands of portraits of local citizens. And over the years, through presentations, Roger shared many of his findings with us. Right now, he's the chair of the Historic Photograph Working Group, and that group is responsible for the future of our negatives and of our photographs. And he's working with a very, they're just getting started, but meanwhile, work continues. Penny, I know Penny was scanning many of our negatives, and we have a large collection down there that we're very anxious to share. We're getting some new software through a project that we have with North Country Public Radio, and we're very excited about that. It will give us a venue, a way to share all our negatives, our images. Probably more people know Roger for his story of the cottages at the Catholic Summer School, and he's also done downtown Plattsburgh presentations. Today, from our collection and his personal research, Roger will show and tell the story of the U.S. presidents who came to our area and their connections to each other. It's very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well. Please let me know if I start to mumble or get too low. This talk came out of, well, first of all, Helen is always bugging me to come up with a talk. And I was doing an inventory for some reason of photos that we had of presidents. And about the same time, I had seen a documentary about Theodore Roosevelt. I'd also seen another documentary about FDR. And when I looked at the photos and thought about those, I started to see some weird, interesting connections. And this talk came out of that. It's not meant to be all the presidents who visited the North Country, although it will probably cover most of them. We can have a talk afterwards about other presidents who have been up here. But it's one that, it's more about the connections. Then the presidents and the story behind them is interesting. I hope you'll enjoy it. I'm glad to do it. It really starts in our story. Starts in the end of the 1800s, 1897. And in 1897, President William McKinley and also the Vice President, Garrett Hobart, they came up to the Hotel Champlain. He arrived, this is a photo of him arriving at the railroad station. There was a Bluff Point Railroad Station at the bottom of the hill that goes up to Clinton Community College now. And this is where that photo was taken. This is from our collection. I'll tell you a little bit about the Hotel Champlain. It started, Smith Weed he had purchased the land in Bluff Point. And Smithweed is a very interesting character. I don't think he gets anywhere near the publicity that he should locally. He was, I think he was born in Malone. He went to, I think it was Harvard, might have been Yale. He resettled in Plattsburgh after college and he had a law degree. Started practice, became a very successful businessman and lawyer. He went to Albany as, I think, an assemblyman, and had a lot of influence there. He was known for shepherding the D&H Railroad link between Whitehall and Plattsburgh. Until they had that, there wasn't a rail link there. So he did that, and that was a major influence in the area. He was a Democrat. He was known as more of a progressive. And he kind of counterbalanced Tammany Hall, who ran, that was a Democratic organization that ran New York City and consequently had a lot of influence in Albany. He was anti-Tammany Hall, and he was an influential character who did that. So after he bought this land and he was up there and he realized what an incredible view there was from Bluff Point, he came up with the idea of putting a hotel there. And he went to the D&H and tried to convince them that if they would build a hotel there and then sell the rail tickets for people coming to the hotel, they could make it would be very successful. They took the idea a lot, they liked it after a while. Somehow squeezed him out of the whole thing. And the Hotel Champlain was owned by the D&H Railroad, or by a company that the D&H Railroad ran. So the hotel at that time, and I believe it was, the construction started in 1888. I think it was finished in time for the 1891 season, the first season. This picture isn't entirely accurate for 1891, because over on the right, this building here, that was connected to the main building. That was an annex. And the hotel was so successful, and right from the start, that they needed more room. And so they built that onto it a few years later. But it was a very large hotel, catered to the rich and famous. There were many, many well-known people that were coming there. And it became a very, very successful hotel. This structure burned down maybe in 1911 or 12 or 10 or something. And the building that you know now as Clinton Community College, that was built. Originally, that building was slated to go in Lake George, I think. They had all the plans ready, and it was very close to the footprint of this building. And they wanted to get this replaced as quickly as possible. So they lifted those plans, brought them up to Plattsburgh, and basically, since the hotel had burned to the ground, they cleared the debris and started again. The second building they built was very, very fire preventative, very much safer. I'm told that the only wood in the building was in the ballroom floor. The rest of it was steel and concrete. So this is McKinley with the vice president. It was more than just a visit to the hotel. It actually became the summer White House. Washington, excuse me, Washington was a very hot and humid place in the summer, and everybody used to leave town as they did. So coming to the North Country in the Adirondacks was a wonderful experience. So this is the two of them in front of the hotel. Also in 1898, the Spanish Civil War occurred, and that prevented McKinley from coming up here in '98. So he was there in '97, and then he returned in 1899, but he wasn't there in 1898. But in the Spanish-American War began. He called for 125,000 volunteers to assist in the war effort. The Rough Riders was a nickname given to one of 3 regiments that was raised in 1898 for the Spanish-American War. The Rough Riders' first commander was Colonel Leonard Wood, and his name will come up in this presentation again. He's one of the connections here. His second in command was the former Assistant Secretary of the Navy in the McKinley administration, Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt, actually McKinley was kind of annoyed with him for resigning, but Theodore Roosevelt was really very warmongering. He kind of griefed me out, to be honest. You know, he isn't what I'm used to. And at the time, he was quite the macho man and the big hero. But he was gung-ho that we have this war, Spanish-American War, and so he volunteered. He quit the Assistant Secretary of the Navy and joined the Rough Riders.
So was that Leonard Wood right next to it?
Yeah,
Roosevelt,
I'm sorry,
in
yeah.
the light-colored uniform?
This is Leonard, and of course Theodore is there. I don't know the other men. The Rough Riders actually did play a key role in the outcome of the Spanish-American War. I thought the whole thing was kind of hyped up because you hear about the role of the charging up the hill. That actually didn't happen. You know, they strolled up the hill is basically what happened. But the military event was key to winning the war. And this is Theodore Roosevelt is here, and many of the other Rough Riders. So when he returned from the war, he returned a hero, mainly in his own mind, but he was a good spokesman. And in 1898, he was elected governor of New York. And that was, you know, that was one of the things, you don't think of him often as the governor of New York, but that was the beginning of his, not the beginning, he was an assemblyman before that, but that was the crowning achievement of his political journey in New York State. So in 1899, McKinley returned to Hotel Champlain, and he was joined, the reason I call it more of a summer White House is he was joined by several cabinet members and by the Vice President, Hobart. And so the government actually was being run from Bluff Point. This photo, by the way, is one of the photos. We have a print of the photo in our collection, but it was shot by Catherine McClellan, and she became, or was, a pretty famous photographer. You will see, and you'll see him several times. There is a gentleman up on the stage. He's right there. And I've taken a closer picture of him. But he'll show up in a lot of pictures. And I'll tell you about him later. We'll let you know. But again, he is an interesting character all in himself. During his 1899 stay at Hotel Champlain, and we know for a long time, I didn't know whether this was the summer of 97 or 99, but we figured out, based on the pith helmet and the uniform, this is the base commander, I think, and based on the uniform that wasn't used until 1899, this must have been the 1899 visit. You'll see McKinley there. You'll see the gentleman back there, I think. The other one that I talked about. Hobart, I think, is there. And McKinley is facing the camera. We have another picture of that group, but McKinley's not facing the camera.
But what building is that? Do we know that? Or?
Actually, we do. If you know which house is the base commander's house, it has a structure. Whoops. It has a structure, see if you can, that is over here, and it's like a bay window on the side, and it's the only one on the oval that has that. So this house that they're sitting in front of is right next to it. It's just to the south of that house. And to me, that's really neat. I like driving by there and say, you know, that was where the president sat. And here he is, reviewing the troops. I believe that this is Vice President Hobart. Now, in that summer, towards the end of the summer, a photo of McKinley and Hobart at Hotel Champlain Wharf was signed by both of them. And a side note is that is the earliest known signed photograph of a president and his vice president. We don't have that photo. We have a print of it, I think, but we don't have the photo itself with the signature. This was the letter that was signed with that photo to Colonel LeGrand Buchanan of Overlake near Burlington, Vermont. This was, he owned, the Colonel LeGrand Buchanan owned the yacht on which the two of them, the Vice President and McKinley, had toured the lake. And it was sent, you can see, from the top of the letter, it was sent from the Executive Mansion, Washington, Hotel Champlain, Clinton County, New York. So it was official. The interesting thing is, was after, I think it was the next day, after that tour of the lake, the Hobarts and McKinley left Plattsburgh for Long Branch, New Jersey. That was the home of the Vice President. And they spent a couple days with him. That was the last they saw him. On November of 1899, because Hobart never left his home and went back to Washington. He was getting very ill. I should have mentioned earlier, Hobart, from the time he was elected Vice President, he was not in good health. He had heart disease, and it just got worse and worse. So in beginning of November in 1899, the government announced that Hobart would not return to public life. His condition deteriorated rapidly, and he died that month of heart failure. After the death of Garrett Hobart, the New York State Party leadership convinced McKinley to accept Roosevelt as a running mate in the next election. Unlike now, the 25th Amendment, I think, sets succession for the president and vice president. Back then, that was before that amendment, so if the vice president died, that was it, there was no vice president. And if the president died, the vice president became president, and there was no vice president. But Roosevelt, he was recommended by the party, mainly because the party wanted to get him the hell out of Albany. He was a real thorn in there, so he didn't do what they said. He was very independent and very progressive. But he decided, and they thought, once you become vice president, you're just, it's doomed to obscurity for the rest of your life, and that was fine by them. But he campaigned vigorously for them. They had won the Spanish-American War, so McKinley was popular, and they did win by a landslide. Not quite a year later, President McKinley was in Buffalo, and he attended the Pan-American Exposition, and when he was shot, I wouldn't even try to pronounce this guy's name, but he was an anarchist. When he was shot, he kind of paused, as you would expect, and took a step back, and the guards grabbed the assassin, hauled him out of there, and then McKinley stepped forward and completed his talk. And most people didn't even know he'd been shot. And considering what happened, it was remarkable. It's remarkable to me. So Roosevelt was vacationing in Vermont, and he traveled to Buffalo to visit him. Later, it appeared that McKinley would recover, so Roosevelt resumed his vacation and went back to the Adirondacks. When McKinley's condition worsened, then Roosevelt was informed, and he began the trip back to Buffalo, and it was a legend of the great stagecoach ride from North Creek. And he continued on to Buffalo. By the time he got there, McKinley died, and he was sworn in as president at the Anthony Wilcox house.
Roger? It's according to the folks in Isle of Mont, he was in Isle of Mont when he heard that he'd been shot,
Oh,
and then he left Isle of Mont. That's according to all the literature they have at Isle of Mont, so.
Well, he was in Vermont.
He was in Vermont, and
And when
according
he
to
heard that McKinley was shot,
right,
he went to Buffalo.
right, but it was Isle of Mont, it wasn't, it was kind of specific
It
to
was
this area,
close,
so
yeah.
it's nearby, so I think it's just worth
I
mentioning.
wasn't aware of that, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah,
That's good to know.
he wasn't dead at that point, but he,
Yeah. And they didn't think he would die, and then he suddenly got an infection or something, and he declined very rapidly. So there was no formally designated order of succession. So for Roosevelt's first term, he served without a vice president. And that was from 1901 to 1904. In 1904, he was elected to a full term. I don't know who his vice president was. But after he was elected, even though he could have gone for another term after that, he publicly announced that he would serve another term. And some historians say that that was a major move in his life, that if he hadn't done that, history might have been a lot different. But this is in his campaign in 1904, the national unity was his slogan. It's not clear when the series of photos were taken. These photos were taken. They predate 1915. So we don't know if it was his term as president or vice president. You can see it was after 1899, however. And then you'll see this guy that I pointed earlier on the porch.
It's the same guy.
This is Brigadier General Guy Verner Henry. And I didn't know who he was. He kept popping up in all these photos until Julie Dowd, she's a great researcher, and she told me he was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. That's why he's showing up at these presentations with the president. He was awarded that in the Battle of Cold Harbor in June of 1864 during the Civil War, and said he led the assault of his brigade upon the enemy works, where he had 2 horses shot out from under him. He was very active in the Civil War. He was also active in the Indian Wars and injured a couple times there. I believe he lived in Ogdensburg. I'm not positive about that. Julie's research, a lot of it came from his obituary that was in the Ogdensburg newspaper. So I think he might have been from there. And you can see he's also in this picture. You can see him there. Again, this is Teddy Roosevelt inspecting the troops.
Is that on the oval? Is that on the oval, on the parade
Yeah.
ground, those pictures?
Yeah, I probably should have said that. During his second term, Roosevelt groomed his friend William Howard Taft to succeed him as president, and then Taft did indeed run, and he won in 1908. This is the 2 of them. Now, during Taft's term, and this would be in 1909, during the tercentenary celebration of the discovery of Lake Champlain, President Taft toured the lake, came up the lake, I assume on one of the ferry boats, stopped off at the Catholic Summer School in Cliff Haven, and during that, he gave I think a presentation they had an auditorium there, and then this is in front of the Champlain Club in the Catholic Summer School, where he had the photo, this photo taken. That is the governor of New York. The rest of the people are mainly dignitaries from Catholic Summer School. He went from the Catholic Summer School to the Oval again and inspected the troop there. And this was a picture taken by Catherine McClellan as well. I'm not sure where this picture was taken. During that same time, I believe it was in Plattsburgh. The photographer was Woolsey, who's a photographer that we know from other photos, a local photographer. And I don't know if you can recognize this setting, but this is he and the governor of New York, who's Charles Evans Hughes Sr. In front of the old Clinton County, there's the courthouse, and next to it is the clerk's office, the old clerk's office. And if you put the camera on that lawn, this is shooting across the street. So that is actually the parsonage of the Presbyterian Church. And this is Margaret Street.
Episcopal Church.
Mhm.
Episcopal Church.
You're right, absolutely right. And you can also see the trolley tracks there.
Oh,
In April of 1910, President William Taft nominated the governor of New York to be Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. One of those connections again. Despite having a hand picking Taft as his successor, this is where I say I wonder, historians wonder about the announcement that Teddy Roosevelt made, that he wouldn't run for another term. I think after that taste of being president, he didn't want to give it up, and he grew very frustrated with Taft. He didn't think Taft was progressive enough, and he then tried to win the nomination, the Republican nomination for 1912 against Taft. He failed, he walked out, and he failed because the president has tremendous power in terms of selecting the parties in the state who do the nominating for the delegates. And so Roosevelt didn't get it. He did well, but he didn't get it. So he founded a third party called the Progressive, and it was known as the Bull Moose Party. The campaign between Roosevelt and Taft was a brutal campaign, and unfortunately, or whatever, split the Republican vote. So the Democrat, who was Woodrow Wilson, won the presidency. Following the election defeat, Roosevelt led a 2-year expedition up the Amazon, and I understand he became very ill there and almost died, but he did survive that. But it was a brutal campaign. Then before World War I, Roosevelt, again, the warmonger, was very critical of Woodrow Wilson for keeping a country out of the war. And he offered to lead volunteers to France, but that was rejected by Washington. So he saw another way to prepare the country for the World War, the Great War, as it was known then, that he expected. And we come back to General Leonard Wood. Teddy Roosevelt's commanding officer at the Rough Riders was a key proponent for training college graduates and businessmen to become Army officers, and he saw the need that they would have for them in fighting in World War I. Plattsburgh Barracks hosted a summer camp in 1915 and another one in 1916 to train thousands of young men. And we have photos here in our archives of trains would stop on the tracks. They wouldn't even, they would just stop them right at the barracks. And all these businessmen and college graduates would get off the train, and they were there for the summer and for summer training, the so-called Plattsburgh idea. Charles Evans Hughes resigned from the Supreme Court on June 10th, 1916, to be the Republican candidate to run against Woodrow Wilson in 1916. Interestingly, at the time, his son, Charles Evans Hughes Jr., was in civilian military training at the Blacksburg Barracks and learned that his father was running for president. He was also endorsed by the Progressive Party, thanks to support from Theodore Roosevelt. And so it was Hughes against Wilson. He was, and of course Wilson won that one. He was appointed to the US Supreme Court by President Herbert Hoover to replace Chief Justice, who was connections, William Howard Taft. And I found that attraction to all those connections just impossible to dismiss, you know. So that's pretty much it for the talk. The three men who ran against, narrowly lost to Woodrow Wilson was Theodore Roosevelt, Charles Evans Hughes, and William Howard Taft, all of whom were in Plattsburgh during that period of time. And all the presidents who spoke at the Catholic Summer School in Cliff Haven, and Vice President are McKinley, Vice President Hobart, Governor Roosevelt, and President Taft. We don't think a lot about the Catholic Summer School anymore, but it had an incredibly surprising people who lectured there, and very, very well known nationally. So that is it. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. I do know for those who were looking for all the presidents who visited the North Country, we know Ford was here in 1976. We know, I have a postcard of FDR, and he was campaigning or something on the barracks, at the barracks property. I just learned tonight that sitting in that car with him was Dwight Eisenhower, and that would have been before World War II. I also learned tonight that apparently there was another president who was in the North Country when they opened the military turnpike. I'm not sure who that was. Maybe we can do some research on it. But until tonight, I didn't know that. Of course, Trump was there while he was campaigning.
Clinton,
No
sir.
question, what's the thing about that?
Had a birthday party over in Lake Placid, his 50th.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No questions?
Good.
Thank you.
One question?
Yeah.
Yeah, real quick. You mentioned the railroad, is that the railroad in Cliff Haven? You said about the train station when they dropped them off, or you said on the bottom of the hill, are you talking about the one that we
There
had
was,
out in
yeah,
Cliff Haven?
there was a
There was one
railroad
there,
station in Cliff Haven,
right,
and you can still see the cement platform of that. There was also another one, bigger, nicer actually, in Bluff Point.
oh, there was one,
Yeah,
okay, that's right, when you
it's
you
right
mentioned
where-
that when you were talking, so I was trying to, I didn't realize there was two, I just
Yeah.
always thought there was just one that way.
Yeah, there were two. I believe across from the entrance road to Clinton Community,
Okay.
across Route 9, there's like a dirt road
Mhm.
that goes down there. I think that went down to the railroad station.
Oh, wow, okay.
We do have pictures of that. It was a very nice station.
You mentioned Smithweed. Is Mark Berry's book on Smithweed available here or not?
No, it's not here. No, we don't have it
Oh,
here.
okay, but
No, but I know, I've heard about it.
yeah, Mark
Yeah,
Berry.
Mark Barry did a book on Smithweed. I haven't read it, but I've been promising myself I would. Like I said, I think more people should know about Smithweed. He built the Plattsburgh Opera House,
Started the race.
which was a big theater that would house 1,000 people, would seat 1,000 people. Across his house is what is now the lawyer's office across the bridge that's across from City Hall, there was a park on the banks of the Saranac River. It had a different geography than topography, and there was more space. It wasn't a big steep hill down to the banks of the Saranac River, but that was a very nice park. And he and Peter Sally, because Peter Sally lived across Sally Avenue from Smith Weed, and they were two of the prominent men in town. I suspect, although I haven't been able to research or find anything about it, I suspect he had some influence on the Catholic Summer School selecting Cliff Haven for its location.
Was the railroad station that's downtown now,
Hmm.
was that there while the other two were there? Or
Yeah.
that came later?
No,
there was
they were there.
like three here in Plattsburgh then.
Yeah.
Wow. Well,
Yeah, we don't think about that. And across from the railroad station in what is now Fouquet Apartments,
Mhm.
there was a hotel,
Right in
Fouquet
the corner.
Hotel. But that was one of the big Plattsburgh
Wasn't
hotels.
Grant there, wasn't, I think,
I don't know.
I think
I hear a
read
lot of
that
stories about
Well,
Grant.
I think I read somewhere that he was there, he stayed there. you know.
That could be, it could be. Actually, I have a little bit of history on it. And there were two Fouquet houses. And one was, I think, across the street, the first one, and that burned down, I think. And then they built the hotel. Paul Smith took over at some point, took over the Fouquet House, and it became known as Paul Smith's Fouquet House, and that was how people got to Paul Smith's.
I think there was a stage running, wasn't there? A
Yeah.
stage running here. So as an aside, we're talking about the Catholic Summer School. There's a project afloat on writing the story of the Catholic Summer School. And that'll be very, using the photos that we found, and Roger found in the collection, all the information that he's found, plus telling the story of some of these famous people that did come and
What we're doing is that three volunteers, and we're combing the old newspapers of the Plattsburgh and the surrounding area for just any mention of the Catholic Summer School. There's a lot of mentions of it because during the summer, they had a weekly column about everything that was going on up there. But there are also other things that we're learning. Slowly we're getting some new information. I don't know if the book will or won't ever exist, but I'm very optimistic for one of the things Helen touched on it briefly. One of the things we're looking at is in conjunction with North Country Public Radio, they're giving us an online photo gallery, the software for an online photo gallery, and they'll give it to us. We want to put all our photos up there, which will be a massive project, but I think we can do it. When that gets up, then I can see us putting the story of the Catholic Summer School with all the photos that we have up as the story as an article, an online article, and that I look forward to.
I think it's amazing because we live out there and just, I know they bulldozed everything
Yeah.
up over the hill, I'll say over the hill where we are, because we found stuff in our backyard, you
Yeah.
know, the dogs dug it up, or we've been out there digging, we found, old bottles and dishes and stuff.
Yeah,
So it's just amazing, all those buildings and stuff that, it was just all
Yeah.
bulldozed
yeah, I know,
down.
people,
And you can see where the part of the road was, and of course where down by the beach, it's
Yeah.
just,
yeah, but the only thing that really exists now, since that goes back to then, are the steps down to the beach.
yeah. There is behind our house, way down by the, I'll say by the river, there is a cement, there was a monument or something there because the base is there. Because I see it a lot of times when I go back and throw leaves and stuff. There is a base right down there, so at one time there was some type of monument or something that's there along the river,
The,
or stream, I guess you call it, that's there.
the chapel at the Catholic Summer School had a statue, which is now in front of St. John's, the one on Broad Street. And it might have been the base.
Might have been the
for
base,
that.
because the base is about this big, and I've seen it many times, I've gone down there and I said, remember what was on that base, you wonder about these
Yeah.
things, because it's right on the bottom of the,
Yeah,
how they do
I've heard about old sewer pipes being dug up.
yeah, we sat there.
Um,
The dishes with blue, we found that too.
Yeah. I
What
always,
was dishes and stuff.
there had to be somewhere at the time, there had to be a big pile of garbage. And I've never found it, but it's got to have a wealth of stuff in it. Because all the records, I don't know where the records went. It may be in the archives of the New York Diocese or Ogdensburg.
Well, there's a lot of stuff, pieces of toilet, there's pieces
Oh,
of
different-
wire.
different
I mean, we
bottles,
found bottles,
Kinds of
perfume
bottles
all kinds of
that
living
had
on
the
that.
stoppers.
Yeah. We
Well,
got a,
perfume
dump
bottle
behind
had
our
the
house, I guess you
stopper
might
still
say.
in it. Yeah, it was all encrusted
Yeah.
with mud inside, but the stopper was and the bottle was in perfect shape.
Yeah, so
And a
there's,
couple of like little medicine bottles, or there was a beer bottle that was intact, totally intact.
it's just really cool, but we're part of,
Get a
probably,
shovel, come
we're
on
probably,
out, we'll show
we're
you
part
where
of the
it
dump,
is.
I guess, we had down
I'm
behind
getting a
the
little
house.
What was the time span of the Catholic Summer
It
School?
was 1896. It opened in Cliff Haven until 1941. So it was 45 years. So when they leveled it to build Cliff Haven Estates, these were wooden buildings that were over 50 years old. So at the time, it wasn't thought of as, what neat structures these are. They were just old wooden buildings. And to make the whole development idea was just getting off the ground then, and Cliff Haven was born.
What were the ages of the students, say?
Well, I don't know if it
Were
was.
they teenagers, high schoolers?
Or
or
Catholic Summer School?
Yeah.
Oh, they were
It came with
they were
families.
adults.
The families came and
Families?
they
Okay,
brought.
I had no
they brought-
idea.
Yeah, the school part of
You
it,
say,
the school part of it, the name is actually a little, Catholic Summer Schools is a little deceptive. It
yeah,
was a resort.
okay,
Uh,
all right.
But it also, someday I'll tell you, a couple hours, but they had, every day they had lectures, and they had some great lecturers. And it was all part of the Catholic hierarchy, changing the image of the Catholics and thinking of them as better educated people. And they did, they did a good job of it. But it was a resort. It was also, there was a lot of recreation there. And it was, like I said, every day they had lectures. And it was, it was a Catholic community. They bonded, I think, more than grouped together.
We had a visitor here, and Roger's exhibit was up, and she said, oh yeah, I went there, she was 7 or 8, she remembers, and she went to camp while her mother studied in the morning, and then they would get dressed for lunch. They had to be dressed for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They had, because if you saw the dining room, it's very formal in the pictures that Roger has. And then she said, then her mother would go play golf in the afternoon, and she would go back to playing with the kids. So they had kids programs.
Yeah.
And then her
Tennis
father
court
would
too,
come-
right?
The fathers would come on the weekends.
Father
by
would come on the
8,
weekend, yeah.
And by the, you go down to the beach and you go up the little hill there in the back, there's still the platform, because the priest house was there, you had a little place.
Yeah, there
where he
was a-
stayed.
Father,
And
yeah.
the
Yeah.
foundation is still there where that was. And we had a couple from New Jersey come several years ago, knocking on the door, and had come to the summer school years ago when they were small. And I took a walk with them, and they would go, this was here, and that was there, and that was there, and
Yeah.
they did this and that, and it was really neat.
Yeah.
They
That
never
must have
really
been
met
fascinating.
anybody that went, you know, and they were staying at, one of the other houses there for a couple of weeks. But they had come back just to see, you know, what it, you know,
Yeah.
looked like now, and had a lot of memories about
It'd be
it.
amazing to talk to her. I've never talked to anybody that was there at the time.
Mhm.
Um,
They're the only ones I ever
And
had.
it's always, you know, somebody else tells me that they met somebody else who, you know, and it drives me nuts, but that's what it is. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Roger.
Very good.